I've been a nurse for 6 years now, and there's a thing that happens to you on nights that nobody really warns you about. It's not the tiredness. Everyone warns you about the tiredness. It's the way the hospital becomes a different building after midnight. During the day, it's loud. Overhead pages, family members in the hallways, dietary carts, PT walking patients with squeaky walkers, phones ringing at the nurse's station every 30 seconds. At night, all of that goes away. And what's left is this enormous building full of sleeping people, and the sound of your own shoes on the floor, and the quiet rhythm of IV pumps ticking down in dark rooms. You get used to it, most of it. But the thing about St. Clair Memorial is that there was always something you didn't get used to, and it was always on the 4th floor. I transferred to St. Clair in October. I'd been working at a larger hospital downtown, but the commute was destroying me. 45 minutes each way, and when you're driving home at 7:30 a.m. after a 12-hour shift, you start seeing things in the road that aren't there. Cars that don't exist. People standing on medians who turn out to be signs. St. Clair was 15 minutes from my apartment. Small community hospital, around 160 beds. Old building. Parts of it had been built in the 1960s and never properly renovated. The kind of place where certain hallway tiles were a different shade because they'd been replaced one at a time over decades. Where the call light system still used the old overhead tone instead of the phone-based system. I liked it though. It was slower, quieter, the kind of place where the night nurses knew each other by name and split takeout in the break room at 2 a.m. My unit was 4 West, medical surgical, 32 beds, mostly post-ops, some chronic care, the occasional confused elderly patient who'd come in from a fall. Standard stuff. The charge nurse who oriented me was a woman named Dina, late 40s, short, direct, the kind of nurse who'd been doing this so long that nothing surprised her and nothing impressed her. She walked me through the unit on my first night, like she was showing me around her house. She pointed out which supply rooms stayed stocked and which ones you had to hunt through. She showed me the clean utility room, the med room, the break room with the microwave that smelled like someone had burned popcorn in 2019 and never cleaned it. Then she walked me to the end of the hallway, past room 410, past 411, all the way to the corner room at the end, room 412. She stopped outside the door, didn't open it. She said the room was occupied, but that I wouldn't be assigned to it. She said it was always assigned to the same nurse, a woman named Margot, who'd been on the unit for over 20 years. Margot took care of 412 every shift, no exceptions. I asked why. Dina said Margot preferred it. She said the patient was long-term and that continuity of care made the most sense. I asked what the patient was in for. Dina paused. Not in a dramatic way, more like she was deciding how much to bother explaining. She said the patient was a woman in her 70s. Long-term placement, comfort-focused. She said the patient rarely needed anything and that I should just consider 412 off my assignment. I said okay. That was it. For the first few weeks, nothing about room 42 registered as unusual. I had my own patients. I had my own chaos. I was learning a new charting system. I was adjusting to the rhythms of a smaller hospital where things moved differently, where the pharmacy closed at midnight and you had to pull from the override cabinet until morning, where the hospitalist was usually asleep by 1 a.m. and you had to really think before you paged. Margot was quiet. She was tall, thin in a way that looked less like fitness and more like she'd stopped noticing food a long time ago. She had dark hair that was going gray at the temples, and she kept it pulled back in a braid so tight it looked like it hurt. She never ate in the break room with the rest of us. She brought a thermos of something that didn't smell like coffee. Something herbal, almost medicinal. She was efficient. I'll give her that. She didn't gossip. She didn't complain. She didn't do the thing most night nurses do, where they talk about their patients as stories. She just worked, charted, made her rounds. She went into room 412 at midnight every single shift. Not around midnight, not roughly midnight, at midnight. I noticed because my chair at the nurse's station faced the hallway and I could see her get up. Every night, same time. She'd take her thermos and her clipboard and walk to the end of the hall. She'd open the door to the 412. She'd go inside. She'd be in there for about 40 minutes. Then she'd come back, sit down, resume charting. I didn't think much of it at first. Some patients are needier at night. Some get anxious. Some have medication schedules that fall at odd hours. But 40 minutes is a long time to be in one room every single night, at the same exact time. And she never drank from that thermos herself. She brought it in full. She brought it back empty. The first thing I noticed, really noticed, was a Tuesday about 3 weeks into my orientation. I was charting, and I needed Margot to co-sign a wasted narcotic. I went looking for her. She wasn't at the station. It was 12:20, so I figured she was in 412. I walked down the hall. The door was closed. I raised my hand to knock, and then I stopped, because I heard her talking. Not unusual. Nurses talk to patients all the time, even sleeping ones, even unresponsive ones. You develop a habit of narrating what you're doing. I'm going to check your IV. I'm going to reposition you. Small things, comfort things. But Margot wasn't narrating. She was having a conversation. I could hear her voice clearly through the door. Steady, low, not a clinical tone at all. More like the voice you'd use with someone you've known for a very long time. And then I heard something else. Another voice. Quieter, thinner, almost too faint to make out. But it was answering her. A back and forth. Steady. Calm, like two people talking over tea. I didn't knock. I went back to the station. When Margot came back, I asked her to co-sign. She did. She didn't mention anything. I didn't ask. But later that night, I looked up the patient in 412 on the charting system. The record showed a patient named Helen Marsh, age 78. Admitted March 14th. That was 7 months ago. The admitting diagnosis was listed as altered mental status. There was a physician order for comfort care only. No vital signs were being charted. No medications were listed. No lab work. No imaging. The last set of vitals in the system was from 5 months ago. The last nursing assessment was 2 months old. Margot had written it. It said, "Patient resting comfortably. No acute distress. Will continue to monitor. 2 months without an assessment. No vitals for 5 months. No medications. No labs. No diet order. No activity level documented." A patient doesn't stay in a hospital for 7 months on comfort care with no vitals being taken unless something very unusual is going on. I told myself it was a documentation gap. This was a small hospital. Things fell through the cracks. Maybe Margot was doing the assessments and not charting them. That happens. It shouldn't, but it does. I let it go, but I kept watching. I noticed that room 412 never received a meal tray. Every other room on the unit was on the dietary list 3 times a day. Room 412 wasn't. I asked one of the day shift CNAs about it. Casually, she looked at me like I'd asked about the weather on the moon. She said 412 wasn't her responsibility. She said she'd never been in that room. Not in a creepy way, not in a way that suggested secrecy. More like the room simply didn't exist in her daily awareness. Like it had been edited out. I started paying closer attention after that. The whiteboard outside 412 was always blank. Every other room on the unit had the patient's name, their nurse, their CNA, their expected discharge date. Room 412 had nothing, just a clean surface, no expected discharge date, and the fluorescent light directly outside the door flickered every night at 11:58 p.m. I timed it across 3 separate shifts. Always 11:58. 2 minutes before Margot went in. Not the lights further down the hall. Just that one. Like a signal. The thing that changed everything happened on a Wednesday night in late November. Margot called out sick. First time since I'd started. Dina was visibly annoyed because it was short notice and they couldn't find a replacement. She reassigned Margot's patients to the rest of us. I got 3 of them. I did not get 412. Nobody did. I asked Dina who was covering 412. She said it would be fine. She said the patient didn't need much. I said the patient had been there for 7 months, and someone should probably check on her at least once. Dina looked at me and said, "The patient is fine. Don't go in that room." She said it the way you'd tell someone not to open a fuse box. Not threatening, just firm, like a rule that existed for practical reasons. I said okay. I did my work. I took care of my patients. I passed midnight meds. I helped a CNA reposition a patient who was too heavy for one person. I charted. I drank bad coffee from the break room. At 1:15 a.m., the call light for 412 went off. The tone sounded at the station. Old system, overhead chime. The room number lit up on the panel above the desk. I looked at it. The other nurses looked at it. Nobody moved. Dina turned it off from the station. 10 minutes later, it went off again. Dina turned it off. 5 minutes later. Again. This time Dina stood up. She didn't say anything to anyone. She walked down the hall. She went into 412. She was in there for about 2 minutes. When she came back, she looked the same as before. Maybe a little paler, hard to tell under the fluorescent lights. She sat down. The call light didn't go off again. I waited until Dina went to the bathroom. Then I pulled up the chart for Helen Marsh again. This time I didn't just look at the most recent notes. I went back, all the way back. And what I found didn't make sense. Helen Marsh was admitted on March 14th of this year. That much was consistent. But there was another admission for Helen Marsh. Dated November 2nd of the previous year. Same room. Same diagnosis. That admission was discharged on February 28th. Discharge disposition, deceased. She died. She was discharged as deceased in February, and then she was admitted again in March. I went further back. There was another admission, starting in June of 2 years ago, ending in October. Discharge disposition, deceased. And another one before that, February to May, deceased. And another one, September to January, Deceased. 5 admissions total. Same patient, same room, same diagnosis. Every single one ended with a discharge to deceased. And every single time she was readmitted weeks later. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. I thought maybe it was a data error, a glitch in the system where old records were duplicating. But the details were different for each admission. Different attending physicians, different dates, different lengths of stay. The notes were sparse, but they were distinct. Different handwriting in the earlier paper-scanned records. This wasn't a duplication. This was the same woman dying and coming back to the same room over and over. I closed the chart. I didn't say anything to Dina. When Margot came back the next night, I watched her more carefully. She arrived at 6:45 like always, changed into her scrubs in the locker room, clocked in, took report. At midnight she got up, took her thermos and her clipboard, walked to the end of the hall. This time I waited 3 minutes, and then I followed. I didn't go to the door. I stood at the corner of the hall where it bends toward 412. From there I could see the door. It was closed. I could hear the conversation again. Margot's voice, steady, familiar, and the other voice. But this time I heard something specific. The other voice said, "She's new." Margot said something I couldn't make out. The other voice said, "She looked at my chart." I stopped breathing. I hadn't told anyone I'd looked at the chart. I'd done it at the nurse's station on a shared computer. Nobody was watching me. Nobody asked what I was doing. But the patient in 412 knew. I went back to the station. I sat down. I pulled up my phone and pretended to be doing something until Margot came back. When she sat down next to me, I didn't look at her. I waited until the silence felt normal, and then I said something casual. I asked if her patient in 412 was doing okay tonight. Margot didn't look up from her charting. She said, "She knows you were listening at the door." My chest went cold. She said it the same way you'd say the patient in 408 needs their PRN. Flat, informational, no emotion attached. I didn't respond. She finished her charting, got up, went to the med room, came back. We didn't speak again for the rest of the shift. The next night I asked one of the older CNAs about room 42. Her name was Patrice. She'd worked at St. Clair for over a decade. I didn't ask about Helen Marsh specifically. I just asked about the room. If there was anything I should know. If there was a reason nobody else went in there. Patrice set down her coffee. She looked at me with this expression that was half pity and half warning. She said the room had been occupied for as long as she could remember. She said different nurses had been assigned to it before Margot. 2 of them left. 1 transferred. 1 quit nursing entirely. I asked what happened. She said they went in after midnight. She said the rule was simple. You don't go into 412 after midnight. You let Margot handle it. You don't ask questions. You don't check on the patient. You don't answer the call light. If the call light goes off, you turn it off from the station and you wait. I asked what happens if you go in. Patrice picked her coffee back up. She said, "The room remembers you." I asked what that meant. She said one of the nurses who went in started hearing her name from the direction of 4212. Not the call light, not a voice from inside, just her name. Quiet at first, coming from the end of the hallway even when she was in the break room. By the second night, she could hear it from the elevator. By the third night, she heard it in the parking lot when she was getting into her car. She transferred the following week. The other nurse who went in had a different experience. She'd gone in during a code situation to grab equipment. Quick, practical, came out with a suction canister, but after that she started finding things in her pockets. Small things, a button that wasn't hers, a folded piece of paper with a date written on it, and then a hospital bracelet, her name, her date of birth, her medical record number. She wasn't a patient. She'd never been admitted to St. Clair, but the bracelet had her information, and the admission date printed on it was 3 years in the future. She quit a month later, left nursing entirely. I asked Patrice what she thought was in that room. She said she didn't think about it. She said that was the whole point. I tried not to think about it. I really did. But the thing about working nights in a hospital is that your brain has too much empty space, too much quiet, too much time between rounds where you're just sitting at a desk in a hallway that stretches out in both directions, and you can see every closed door and the one at the very end, the one that's always closed, the one that has a patient behind it who has died 4 times and been readmitted every time, the one that knows you looked at her chart. December came. The unit got busier. Flu season, post-holiday falls. People who'd been putting off surgeries all year suddenly wanted them done before their insurance reset. I was tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't go away on your days off. I was sleeping 5 hours, eating whatever was in the vending machine, driving home on autopilot. It was the second week of December when I made the mistake. I didn't mean to. I want that to be clear. I was doing my 1 a.m. round, checking on my patients. Room 408, room 409, room 409, room 409. I was on autopilot. My feet were moving before my brain caught up. I walked past 411 and kept going. My hand was on the door handle of 412 before I realized where I was. I stopped. The hallway was silent. The light outside the door was steady, no flickering. I looked at my watch. It was 1:14 a.m. Margot had already been in and out hours ago. The room should have been quiet, but through the door I felt something. Not a sound, a pressure, like the room was pushing back against the door from the inside. Not physically, more like there was an atmosphere in there that was slightly denser than the hallway. I took my hand off the handle. I stepped back, and then the call light went off. Not the overhead chime, not the one at the station, the one inside the room, the little click of the button being pressed. Someone inside the room pressed the call light while I was standing right outside, and then I heard it. My name. Not from the overhead, not from the hallway, from behind the door. A woman's voice, old, thin, clear. She said my name the way you'd say the name of someone you'd been waiting for, like she'd been expecting me. I walked back to the nurse's station. My hands were shaking. I turned off the call light from the panel. It didn't go off again. I didn't tell Margot, but the next night she looked at me when she arrived, longer than usual. That same flat expression she always wore. She said, "She liked you." I didn't respond. She said, "That's not a good thing." That was all she said about it. For the next 3 nights, the hallway outside 412 felt different when I walked past it during rounds. Like the air was leaning toward me, like the room was aware of when I passed. And on each of those nights, when I got to my car after shift, I found something on my windshield. The first night, it was a folded piece of paper, blank. The second night, it was another piece of paper. This one had a date on it, written in shaky handwriting. The date was 3 days from now. The third night was a hospital bracelet. My name, my date of birth, an admission date. The admission date was the same as the date on the paper. 3 days from now. I called in sick the next shift, and the one after that. On the third day, the date on the bracelet. I stayed home. I locked my door. I turned off my phone. I lay in bed, and I watched the ceiling, and I waited for midnight to pass. Nothing happened. I fell asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up the next morning, I felt fine, normal, just tired from not sleeping well. I went back to work the following night. I felt foolish, like I'd overreacted, like the bracelet was some kind of prank, like Patrice had been messing with me, like the whole thing was an elaborate hazing ritual for the new night nurse. I clocked in, took report, started my shift. Margot was there, same as always, same thermos, same braid, same silence. At midnight, she got up and walked to 412, but this time she stopped in the middle of the hallway. She turned and looked at me. She said, "She's been asking about you every night." I said I didn't want to hear about it. She said, "That's not how it works." She went into the room. The door closed. I sat at the station. I tried to chart. My hands wouldn't cooperate with the keyboard. 20 minutes passed. 30. At 12:42, the door to 412 opened. But Margot didn't come out. The door just opened. Slowly. All the way. The hallway light from above reached maybe 2 feet into the room. Beyond that, it was dark. Not the kind of dark that exists when a light is turned off. Something more settled than that. Like the dark in that room had weight. I stared down the hallway at the open door, and from inside the room I heard Margot say, "You should come." Not like she wanted me to, like she was relaying a message. I didn't move. The door stayed open for about 15 seconds, then it closed on its own. Margot came out at 12:55. She looked the same, walked the same, sat down the same, but her thermos was empty, and there was something on her clipboard that hadn't been there before. A list. I could see it from my chair, handwritten, not Margot's handwriting. The letters were shaky, uneven, old. A list of names. I couldn't read them all from where I sat, but I could read the one at the bottom. It was mine. Margot noticed me looking. She didn't cover it. She didn't turn the clipboard over. She just said, "She keeps a list of everyone who's ever been close to the room. It helps her remember." I asked, "Remember what?" Margot said, "Who's next?" I asked what that meant. A call light went off down the hall. Room 404. Margot didn't move. Neither did I. The CNA got it. In the silence after the chime stopped, Margot said that Helen Marsh didn't stay in room 412 because she was a patient. She said Helen Marsh was the room. She let that sit there. She didn't explain it right away. She went back to charting for a moment, wrote something, clicked something, like the sentence she just said was ordinary. Then she told me Helen had died in that room in 1987. Original building, before the renovation. She died alone, no family, no call light answered. She coded, and nobody came for 40 minutes. Margot stopped talking. She was looking down the hallway toward 412. I followed her gaze. The hallway was empty. The door was closed, but the light outside the door flickered once. Margot watched it. Then she continued. She said after that the room never stayed empty. Every time they discharged a patient from 412 and left it unoccupied, someone would show up in the system. A new admission, chart created automatically, bracelet printed, but no one was physically admitted. The system would generate a patient named Helen Marsh. Same information, same diagnosis, same room. I asked how that was possible. Margot didn't answer that. She said they tried closing the room, locking it, taking it off the bedboard. She paused again. Not for effect. More like she was listening to something. I listened too. The unit was quiet. Just the hum of the fluorescents and the distant beep of an IV pump in room 406. She said the admissions kept appearing, and the call light kept going off, and staff who ignored it started hearing things. Their names, from down the hall, from the parking lot, from their homes at 3 a.m. So they stopped fighting it. They assigned a nurse. Margot volunteered. She'd been new then. 23 years ago, she went in every night at midnight. She talked to Helen. She brought her the tea. Something specific. She wouldn't say what was in it. She said Helen was mostly calm as long as someone came, as long as midnight wasn't quiet. But when nobody came, Helen started reaching out. The names on the list, the bracelet on the windshield, the date. Margot said Helen didn't want to hurt anyone. She just didn't want to be alone. She died alone, and the room had never let go of that. But the way Helen drew people in wasn't kind. It was the only way she knew. Hospital bracelets, admission dates. Because in Helen's mind, the only way to keep someone close was to admit them. And once you were admitted to 412, you didn't leave. Not the way other patients leave. I asked about the discharge dispositions in the chart. Deceased. Every time. Margot said the system generated a discharge for Helen at the end of every cycle, because that's what happened. Helen died. Every few months. The same death. The same code. The same 40 minutes of silence. And then she came back. Because the room wouldn't let her go. And because nobody had answered the call light in time. I asked about the date on my bracelet. The admission date that had already passed. Margot said Helen had wanted me to come. That night. The night I'd touched the door. Helen had felt me on the other side and decided I was the one she wanted. Not to hurt, not to trap, to sit with her, to be in the room when it happened, so she wouldn't be alone this time. But Margot said the dates on the bracelets weren't just invitations. They were deadlines. She said if you entered the room on the date printed on the bracelet, you would sit with Helen, and she would die, and you would leave. Shaken, but fine. But if you didn't come on the date, and you didn't come after, the room started pulling. The name on the list moved up. The sound of your name got louder, closer, more persistent, until one night, you'd be walking the hallway and you wouldn't be able to stop yourself from opening the door. And by then it wouldn't be midnight. It would be the 40 minutes. The 40 minutes where nobody came. And you'd be in the room during that window. And the room would count you. I asked what that meant. Count you. Margot looked down the hall again. The door to 412 was still closed. But I thought I saw a shadow cross the gap between the door and the floor. Like something had passed in front of a light source inside the room. There was no light source inside the room. Margot said she didn't know exactly what being counted meant. She said 2 of the nurses from before her time had been counted. They didn't die. They didn't disappear. But they stopped sleeping. They said they could feel the room even when they weren't in the hospital. Like a hand resting on the back of their neck that never lifted. like being watched from the inside. One of them is still alive, lives upstate, doesn't work anymore, doesn't go near hospitals. The other one moved into a long-term care facility in her 50s, not because she needed the care, because she couldn't stand being alone in a room anymore. I sat at the nurse's station for the rest of that shift, and I watched the hallway, and I listened to the building settle around me. The IV pumps, the occasional call light, the hum of the fluorescents, and from the very end of the hall, barely audible, so faint I couldn't be sure it was real, I heard my name. Not every night, but most nights. Margot retired 3 months ago. Nobody volunteered to take her place. They posted the position, nights, permanent assignment, room 412. Nobody applied. They tried rotating nurses through, 2 weeks each. The first nurse lasted 9 days. She said she heard the conversation through the door. 2 voices, but Margot was gone. There was no other nurse in the room. She went in at midnight anyway. She came out 4 minutes later and drove home without clocking out. She said the woman in the bed looked at her and smiled and said, "You're not Margot." She said the woman looked like she hadn't aged in decades. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were open, but they didn't track normally. They stayed fixed on one spot, wherever you stood, like they were pinned to you. She said the woman held her hand out and asked her to stay. She said the room smelled like old tea. The second nurse lasted 2 nights. He didn't go in. He just turned off the call light from the station every time it went off. By the second night, the call light was going off every 3 minutes. When he left after that shift, he found a hospital bracelet on his dashboard, inside his locked car. He didn't come back. I'm the third nurse, not because I volunteered, because I'm the only night nurse left on 4 West who hasn't refused, and because my name is already on the list. It has been since the night I touched the door. I go in at midnight now, every shift. I bring the tea. Margot left the recipe in her locker, handwritten on an index card. Chamomile and something I had to order from an herbal shop 2 towns over. I steep it for exactly 7 minutes. I pour it into the thermos at 11:45. I open the door at midnight. Helen is always awake. She's always in the bed. Her hands are folded over the blanket. Her eyes find me immediately. She doesn't look 78. She doesn't look sick. She looks like a woman who has been waiting for a very long time and has learned how to be patient about it. I sit in the chair next to the bed. I pour her tea into a paper cup. I set it on the bedside table, but it's always empty when I leave. We talk about small things, the weather, my drive to work, what I had for dinner. She asks about my cat. She knows his name even though I never told her. She knows things, not in a way that feels invasive, more like the way a building knows who walks through it every day. She absorbs. She accumulates. Sometimes she tells me about the hospital the way it was in the 1980s, the layout, the staff, the sounds. She describes specific nurses, specific doctors. She describes the color of the walls before the last renovation. She describes the night she died, not dramatically, not with anger or grief, more like reporting something that happened to someone else. The chest pain that started around 11 p.m., the call light she pressed, the sound of the chime going off at the station, the waiting, the 40 minutes. She describes the way the room got quiet, the way the clock on the wall kept ticking, The way the light from the hallway leaked under the door, and she watched it and waited for it to break. For someone to open the door. For shoes on the tile. Nobody came. She says she can still feel those 40 minutes. Like they never ended. Like the room is still inside them. Like every midnight is the beginning of them again. And every time I come through the door, the 40 minutes get a little shorter. Because someone answered. I've been doing this for 11 weeks now. I come in at midnight. I stay until 12:40. I answer the call light. But here's the thing I haven't told anyone. Last week I fell asleep in the chair. Just for a moment. Maybe 2 minutes. I was exhausted. It was 12:35. When I opened my eyes, Helen was standing. Not in the bed. Standing next to my chair. Looking down at me. Her hand was on my shoulder. And the clock on the wall said 11:58 p.m. 42 minutes had passed. But the clock had gone backwards. I was inside the 40 minutes. I stood up. She was still there. Still watching me. Still patient. She said, "You don't have to leave." I said I had patients to check on. She said, "They're not going anywhere." I walked to the door, opened it. The hallway was dark. Not the normal dim of night shift. Completely dark. The nurse's station was empty. The lights were off. The call light panel was blank. I turned around. Helen was back in the bed. Eyes closed. Like she'd never moved. The clock said 12:40. The hallway was lit again. The station was occupied. I could hear a CNA laughing about something in the break room. I walked back to my chair. I sat down. I opened the charting system. Everything was normal, but the tea was gone, and the paper cup was on the floor next to my chair, not the bedside table. Next to my chair, like I'd been the one drinking it. I poured myself a cup of coffee when I got back to the station. Real coffee. Bitter. Burnt. My hands were steady. My pulse was normal. But there was something in my scrub pocket that hadn't been there before. A folded piece of paper. I didn't unfold it until I got to my car after shift. It was a date. 2 weeks from now. And below it, in Helen's handwriting, "Thank you for answering. I don't know what happens on that date. I don't know if it's another death, another cycle, another 40 minutes. I don't know if I'm supposed to be there when it happens. I do know that I can hear my name now, not just at work, at home, when I'm falling asleep, when I'm in the shower, when I'm driving. It's not loud. It's not frightening. It sounds like someone calling from down a long hallway. Like a patient who needs something. Like a woman who pressed a button 37 years ago and is still waiting for someone to walk through the door. I'll be there on that date. I already know I will. Not because I have to, because I know what it's like to be alone in a room and wish someone would come. And the thing I keep thinking, the thing that won't let me go, is that maybe that's why the room chose me in the first place. Because it knew I understood. And I'm not sure anymore if the room is pulling me in, or if it's the only place that feels like I belong. I noticed something yesterday, though. Something small. I'm sure it's nothing. When I was leaving after my shift, I passed the break room. The whiteboard in there has the schedule posted. Names, dates, assignments. I stopped because something caught my eye. Next to my name, in the assignment column for the date on Helen's note, someone had written 412 in handwriting that wasn't Dina's. Wasn't the scheduler's. It was mine. My handwriting. But I never wrote it. And below the assignment, in the same handwriting, was a second notation. A discharge date. Same date as the admission. Same day. I stood there looking at it for a long time. I don't remember picking up the marker, but it was still in my hand. Subscribe for more horror stories. Comment what kind of horror unsettles you the most, and press the bell icon to get haunted.